Hello, what an interesting week this has been, hasn't it? There has been a big parade in London in favour of just opening up the country, and that attracted a lot of people. And I could be talking about that. And there's some news about the Sussexes, and I could be talking about that. In fact, I think I'm going to talk about that, but not before I get to talk about Matt Hancock and Gina Coladangelo. Now, Matt Hancock was the Minister for Health, and he was a supremely incompetent operator. This is a photo of Matt Hancock showing that he wasn't a supremely incompetent operator in absolutely everything. In fact, I saw there's a video online, which I'm not playing because it's got the Sun watermark all over it, and I'm afraid I might get copyright strikes on it. But it shows his encounter with Miss Coladangelo, and you know what? It's quite a passionate clinch. I mean, it's the sort of thing you can imagine in movies. You know, he's good. He's good. I know. I have to say, he looked pretty passionate, and you know, it looked good. He shouldn't have been doing it. That's a different matter. Now here, but okay, look, there are a lot of people hopping up and down about Hancock's breaking of the COVID rules, because that's what he was doing. Although, I don't know, he was in his office, who knows, but he certainly shouldn't have been in a clinch with her. And there's a lot of faux outrage about that. In general, Hancock wasn't going around super spreading. He had this little bit on the side. I'm afraid I can't get that much exercised about that particular aspect of the whole affair, so to speak. There are a lot of people stamping their feet and saying what a hypocrite he is. Well, yes, we're all hypocrites. A lot of people have cheated. I didn't cheat because I didn't need to, but I know that there are plenty of people who do a few things on the sly. You can't avoid it sometimes. And I might say, at the same time as he was in that clinch, there were people, key workers, going to work on the London Underground in the most diabolically crowded conditions you could imagine, because Sadiq Khan actually cut the trains. So, you know, people were doing this. Excuse me. So I am not going to have a go at him for having a girlfriend. You know, that's another matter. Adultery, that's another matter. But what I am annoyed about, well, I'm annoyed about a couple of things, but let's start with the first. According to the Daily Mail of the 27th of June, Hancock had hired her, Mr. Coladangelo. That's Cola of the Angel. That's sort of interesting itself. I wonder what cola means. Okay, Hancock had hired her as a health aide in September as a non-executive director at the Department of Health, which means that she was getting a salary of £15,000 a year, which isn't an enormous amount, but I assume that's a second job. He had hired a worker who was his mistress at public expense. I find that pretty objectionable. So, okay, now let's get on to the second thing that I'm angry about, and that's Hancock's bloody incompetence. The Delta variant, or the Indian variant, they didn't want to call it the Indian variant because that's racist. The Delta variant, or whatever the politically correct thing is now, was known about in October. Britain has a lot of connections with the Indian subcontinent, and planes were flying in from all over India and Pakistan to London, to Birmingham, to Manchester, to Leeds, to Glasgow, just anywhere you name it. So it wasn't like we had people coming into London and the virus was going to spread from London out. No, it's all over the country. And I think something like 90% of the COVID cases now are the Delta variant. And he let these planes fly in right up until April. There's only one government with displaying more incompetence, and that's America. Sorry, chaps. They didn't stop the flights from India till May. So your health department actually pips ours to the post. But back to Britain. The result of this colossally stupid delay is a gigantic spike in infections. If you look at the charts, Australia, which shut everything down straight away, they're nice and flat on the bottom, and then you see France and Germany and all those places, and then you see Britain, woo, like that, just like that. It's not as serious as it could have been because not so many of the victims have required hospitalisation. I might tell you that the Indian variant has a different profile from the standard stuff. So when you look at the internet, you go on things, what are the symptoms? And you say, well, I've got this and this. Do I have COVID? The Delta variant is different. It presents with a headache and a runny nose and sneezing, just like a common cold. And this loss of smell business and the other stuff, that's not happening with the Indian variant. So you can have that, and you can have it when you've been vaccinated. But you might not be really ill, but you will be spreading it around. And it's, well, of course, Europe are going to get it as well because they didn't shut down quickly enough either. But Britain is in a serious state now. And it was absolutely preventable. So, Dominic Cummings, that's to those who don't know, that's a sacked prime ministerial advisor who was involved in a bit of a COVID not quite breaking scandal. By the way, all the press who are let's just backtrack. Dominic Cummings, knowing he had or was just about to get COVID, packed his wife and his autistic son in the car and went to his parents' place in Cumbria because, and that's like a 250-mile car journey from where he lived in London. And he did that because he knew that there wouldn't be anyone to take care of his autistic son. And he was worried that the kid would end up being taken away and fostered or something like that when he couldn't handle it because he's autistic. So he went up to his parents' farm in Cumbria and stayed in a cottage on the farm. And he said he didn't get out of the car on the way there. And it seemed to me, actually, at the time, I thought that was perfectly reasonable. But the press tried to maul him. And the same press that's accusing Hancock of hypocrisy for clinching with his girlfriend were the people who, at the time, you weren't supposed to get near anybody, who were crowding around, shoving each other and pushing each other and crowding around Dominic Cummings for breaking COVID regulations, restrictions. And this is why I am not that keyed up about the hypocrisy of him having a bit of nookie after office hours. But I am angry about him employing his bit on the side at my expense. I didn't sign up for that. And I am annoyed that he could have stopped the Delta variant from getting here, or at least from seeding itself all over the country in the way it did, if he'd have been faster to shut down the flights. That's what I'm annoyed about. And all the other stuff seems to me to be a distraction. And I think Dominic Cummings was right about Hancock. He called him totally bleeping hopeless. And he is. Cummings didn't use the word bleeping, of course. This leads me on to another question. How did they get those videos? Where did they come from? It's from the angle of the photographs, you can see that the camera was in the ceiling. So I am assuming it was put up there as a fake smoke detector. It's not an official video. There are no video cameras in ministers' rooms. None. That is an absolute iron rule. Well, obviously, there was this one, but not officially. It's an obvious security measure. You can't have the possibility of embarrassing pictures of ministers splashed all over the news. And I'm not talking about clinches with assistants. I'm talking about, well, I don't know, picking his nose, for instance, or having a secret meeting with a foreign representative who doesn't want to be identified, that sort of thing. You can't have records of that. So it's really serious when somebody managed to get a record. Someone put a video camera up in Hancock's private room. And it looks to me like that sort of thing where you can just have it streamed straight to your mobile phone. You wouldn't have to go into the office to retrieve the film. There's no film to retrieve. So I reckon that this is really something more to worry about than an incompetent and dishonest minister being caught in flagrante with a publicly funded assistant. This is to do with an incompetent security service that couldn't identify a fake smoke detector, and I haven't seen anyone asking about that. Somebody will sooner or later. Actually, my money's on Dominic Cummings. He'd have had access to those rooms. For all we know, there might be more in other rooms, but, that's just a guess. The video was sold to the Sun newspaper. You can imagine all the other newspapers just tearing their hair at how the Sun managed to get a scoop like that. So it could be just a disgruntled or opportunistic office worker as well. He knew something was going on, or it could have been an office cleaner, knew something was going on and decided to do a bit of freelance journalism. Anyway, I'm sure that video must have got whoever it was quite a bundle from the Sun. Whatever, I don't actually think it was a foreign country because they wouldn't have released the pictures. They'd have just used them as leverage, wouldn't they? So the only reason to publish would be money. Or if it was Cummings' revenge, whatever. Either of those two would probably have convinced themselves that it was a good thing they did because it was a patriotic act to tell people what Matt Hancock was up to. Well, frankly, I'd be inclined to agree with them, even though this is a dangerous development and absolutely has to be dealt with. Meanwhile, I think this may be one of the best jokes I've ever written. While you Yanks have scandals involving uranium contracts, lucrative oil deals, and even fees for paintings put out by certain relatives of the president, in other words, your scandals all involve money. Our scandals, British politics, seem nearly all to have to do with sex, which is actually a lot more productive. But you can be proud, because if it involves sex, there'll always be an England.
While there's a country lane, wherever there's a cottage small, beside a field of grain, there'll always be an England. While there's a busy street, wherever there's a turning wheel, a million marching feet.